Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon. We will begin in 5 minutes, okay? In 5 minutes. Thank you.
Roberta.
Very good. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Es un gran placer tenerlos a todos y a todas ustedes aquí en esta sesión. Es una sesión muy importante. Y en esta sesión vamos a tener varios expositores, pero quisiéramos en primer lugar darles la bienvenida al doctor Jarbas Barbosa, director de la OPS, al embajador Tobar da Silva Núñez, vicepresidente del INB. Tengo a mi izquierda al director ejecutivo de la OMS, el doctor Mike Ryan, también el director adjunto de la OMS. Tenemos al señor Colin McKeefe de los Estados Unidos de América. Tenemos a la doctora Alejandra Pizarro Ibáñez de Chile, a la señorita Zoe Khan de Canadá. Y tengo a mi derecha a la doctora Roberta Andraghetti, invitada especial nuestra para esta sesión, que también trabaja con el secretariado en apoyo a las negociaciones del Reglamento Sanitario Internacional y del acuerdo pandémico. Sin más preámbulo, pido a nuestro director, doctor Jarbas Barbosa, que nos dé algunas palabras. Doctor.
Thank you. Ciro, first I want to recognize and to thank everybody that is here. This is an informative session. As you know, from the beginning, we are always reaffirming that this is a member state-driven process, but I firmly believe that it's our obligation to provide this kind of platform where we can share information, we can bring the countries together to facilitate their consensus. So, good afternoon, Your Excellencies, Honorable Minister, distinguished delegates, representatives, and colleagues. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this briefing session on the pandemic accord/treaty/instrument held on the margins of the 65th session of our Direct Council. We expect that this session will serve as an opportunity to provide important updates on the pandemic accord negotiations. And we are very happy to have with us Ambassador Tovar, that is the representative of our region in the mechanism, in the body that is negotiating this accord. So it's very important because we will receive an update from the most important source that we have here in the region. We are reminded of the ongoing challenges we face globally with multiple epidemics currently affecting various regions. In the Americas, we are experiencing a rise in dengue fever cases, new detections of Oropouche fever, and the continued risk of H5N1 avian influenza. Meanwhile, mpox, that is affecting many countries in Africa, remains as a global concern. Therefore, it is crucial to acknowledge the importance of protecting the population from severe health threats through a coordinated international action to prevent, mitigate, prepare for, and respond to health emergencies. Just a few years ago, we sadly witnessed that solidarity and equity were the first victims of the COVID-19 pandemic. When the Americas became the epicenter of the pandemic, our region had extremely low access to critical personal protective equipment, laboratory reagents, diagnostic tests, vaccines, oxygen concentrators, and many more. The global supply chain collapsed, leaving our countries at the mercy of organizations, mechanisms, and industry that did not prioritize our region during the period of highest rates of transmission, hospitalizations, and deaths. The critical medical supplies, equipment, and PPEs available at our regional health emergency stockpile enabled PAHO to provide the hardly needed support to our countries when they needed the most, but it was not enough. Over 1/3 of global COVID-19 deaths occurred in our region, despite representing only 80% of the world's population. This stark reality underscores the urgent need to strengthen our defenses against future health emergencies. The COVID-19 pandemic will not be the last pandemic, but we have a collective opportunity to come together and jointly take the crucial and prompt steps that will enable the global community to reduce the health, social, and economic impact of future health emergencies. Let me now switch to Spanish. Debemos aprender las lecciones y actuar juntos, con convicción y sin demora. Es imperativo que todos los países, independientemente de su situación económica, tengan acceso a herramientas sanitarias esenciales durante una pandemia. Esta sesión tiene como objetivo informar a las autoridades nacionales sobre el estado de las negociaciones y las implicaciones regionales y globales del acuerdo sobre pandemias. Nuestro propósito es que nuestros Estados miembros estén al tanto de los principales avances y retos hacia el logro de consensos, promoviendo y facilitando su participación significativa en las negociaciones en curso. Recordemos que durante la 77ª Asamblea Mundial de la Salud, los Estados miembros de las Américas desempeñaron un papel fundamental en la aprobación de enmiendas al Reglamento Sanitário Internacional. Este logro histórico marcó un gran paso adelante en la preparación mundial para una pandemia. La alineación y coherencia entre el Reglamento Sanitario Internacional y el nuevo acuerdo pandémico que se está negociando actualmente es esencial para garantizar un enfoque integral y coordinado para enfrentar las futuras amenazas para la salud pública. Me gustaría aprovechar essa oportunidade para reconocer personalmente el liderazgo, el compromiso y la contribución de la coordinación del Grupo de las Américas en Ginebra, representada por el Dr. Honorable Christopher Tufton, ministro de Salud y Bienestar de Jamaica, y el vicepresidente del INB en representación de nuestra región, del embajador Tovar da Silva Nunes, de Brasil. Permita-me agradecer e reconhecer também ao senhor Colin McKeith, de los Estados Unidos de América, à la doutora Alejandra Pizarro, de Chile, ao senhor Ibanez, à la doutora Zoe Kahn, del Canadá, e à la doutora Roberta Andraghetti, de la OMS, e a minha colega Ciro Garte, que contribuíram a essa sessão informativa. Gostaria também de agradecer, que é um honor ter entre nós outros o diretor de emergências da OMS e também o diretor-geral adjunto de nossa Organização Mundial de la Salud, Mike Ryan, Dr. Mike Ryan, que vai também aqui a participar. É um honor, Mike, to receive you among us this afternoon. Espero com interesse nosso diálogo sobre esse tema prioritário. Nosso compromisso conjunto é clave para dar forma a um futuro mais seguro e saudável para todos. Muitas graças a todos e vamos a começar a sessão. Ciro.
Muchas gracias, doctor Jarbas Barbosa. Es una sesión muy importante y, como dijo nuestro director, quien ha estado representando nuestra región en las negociaciones es el embajador Tovar da Silva Nunes, a quien le doy la palabra. Embajador, por favor.
Muito obrigado. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Allow me, please, to thank, through Dr. Barbosa, the entire organization and the team to organize this session. It is, I think, the 5th occasion, if I'm not mistaken, that we have this privilege of discussing very important negotiations taking place in Geneva, and this region has taken the lead, not only in coordinating, but also enabling countries to come to the discussions well-informed and proposing ways out for us all to have a very meaningful, ambitious, robust, but viable instrument. This should still be the aim, and I trust that this region will help. I'm very honored to continue to represent the Americas in the INB Bureau, and I bring from the entire Bureau this message. This region has played not only a very constructive, but very engaged role, and I think we should maintain that until the end. And what is the end? I have here what we have seen lately. We just finished INB 11 from the 9th of September to the 20th. It was preceded by what we call the interactive dialogues with resourced persons, enabling outside the negotiating room to talk to experts, to talk to those from the industry also, and see what we can do. In my opinion, we're not lacking knowledge. All delegations now are very aware of what is at stake. We now have a calendar that should not be overwhelming, and the calendar, let me put it to you, this is the decision taken in May at the Health Assembly, the World Health Assembly. We were invited to continue our negotiations, but to finish as soon as possible. This is a very vague expression, as soon as possible. Obviously, we would have finished by May, but we were not able to. Let us not forget the organization. The last time it came with an Article 19, it was the FCTC on tobacco control. And for 20 years, we're talking about an organization that for 20 years has not been able to produce, or has not produced, not been able, but has not produced any legally binding instrument. That's a whole generation that is not taking part in negotiations for legal provisions dealing with global health. So it would be unreal maybe to squeeze in 2 years the definition of provisions for the entire planet in such a short time. But I think we can do as soon as possible. There is the possibility of calling for a special assembly in December, or continue our work until May next year. So this is our calendar. Let me go back to indicate what is pending still. After all of these discussions, after 11 sessions of INB, some of them actually had more than one, actually it was a resumed session. The number did not reflect. So we have had ample chance to map what we can do in order to prepare, prevent, and respond to pandemic emergencies. Dr. Barbosa mentioned a historical landmark, which was the approval of the targetedly amended IHR in May last. So I think that is also very auspicious. Remember that it took 10 years for the IHR, the old one, to come to existence from 1995 to 2005. So these things take a long time, but in the face of what we have seen during COVID-19, the need for solidarity and equity, the need for financing to reach those that need, research, transfer of technology and know-how, technological empowerment, and very important, local production, the possibility of sustainable and geographically diversified production of medical countermeasures. All of this should be reasons enough for us to move forward. There's no room for crossing our arms and waiting for the perfect logic, for the perfect language, for the perfect exchange of gains here and there. It is a collective effort. We always stand to lose if we do not come with an agreement. So I think we can do this. You will see in the list that just a summary, and then some of here, and I salute my fellow negotiators here present. We will be discussing Article 4 in more detail and Article 12. That still needs to be adjusted. We need to define what we mean by transfer of technology. Nobody is thinking about coercive. Nobody's trying to bring anybody to the table coerced. So I think it suffices to indicate that when we speak of transfer of technology, we are, by definition, speaking of non-coercive and on mutually agreed terms. We have been able to do that in G20 when we discussed development. We said transfer of technology under voluntary and mutually agreed terms. Why not repeat that? You see, there are ways, but in my opinion, some delegations are still camped in their original positions. If it's not with voluntary and mutually agreed, there's no way. Others do not want the word voluntary. Just giving you a flavor of what we're still hearing from the discussion. It's time for us to transcend that. And transcend means encapsulate the concerns. We want everybody that is an actor in transfer of technology to be on its own volition and will to come to the table and speak about how to best empower other parties and other actors in technology for the production of medical countermeasures. TRIPS flexibility, it's another sort of a four-letter word, TRIPS, because every time you speak about it, every delegation gets a bit on the, there is no room for that. We have already very specific flexibilities. We just want to use those flexibilities in a manner that it's not, let's say, punished. So it's a mention. That's what I mentioned as a peace clause. There should be a way for us to refer to what has been agreed in another instance in a way that would benefit prevention, preparedness, and response to pandemic emergencies. There's a more specific issue dealing with liability, and there's another one on traceability as well for PABs, but that goes inside PABs. And finally, it has this pompous name, legal architecture. Frankly, I think we should drop that idea of architecture because we have already two options to continue our work. That is in the form of an annex or a protocol. That's what we have agreed in Chapter 3 of the agreement. What does that mean? When we discuss prevention, we know that prevention is part of a pillar of the agreement. It's the first P, prevention, preparedness, and response. So prevention should feature handsomely and very specific, but it tied with financing possibilities, with special conditions for all countries, but especially developing countries, because it's not easy to increase the level of prevention in addition to what you have already in the IHR if you do not have the means. So I think it's empty just to call for more prevention, more surveillance, in addition to what you have already. So there is a doses that has to be established, and some guidelines are needed. So we will need further work on prevention. That's Article 4. The same goes for pathogen access and benefit sharing, PABs, that's Article 12. There's no room for us to discuss, for example, what are the terms of the agreement that those that share information will get as benefits. Those actors, we don't know who they are now. We need to create first the system and its pillars, and then we'll discuss how the modalities, the definition inside the system, all of this is already agreed, so there is no need for us to dwell on that. What I'm trying to say is, with that, I'm going to jump to the next steps. There is on the table, if you look at the draft as it stands now, and you look at what is called the green text, agreed language, there are elements that clearly are forming a historical breakthrough. For the first time, we're discussing in the preamble already traditional knowledge and indigenous populations. We are mentioning specific consideration for small island developing countries or parties. We are discussing in a very specific ways the needs for developing countries. We're also creating a coordinating financing mechanism which will mirror the one that we have in IHR and inform the whole financing of this agreement. We are creating a logistics and a network, supply chain and logistics network. We're creating a position that the possibility of creating sustainable and geographically diversified production. These are very meaningful, and we're also creating a pathogen access and benefit sharing system. All of these steps, if you agree on them, they are sufficient enough for us to avoid what I call the wrong narrative, which is we're creating a light agreement, we're creating a shell agreement, we're creating a framework agreement. This is simply not true. What we have already is beyond framework, it's beyond shell, it's beyond light. It's not what some also have been saying, wrong narrative again, that we are transferring sovereignty to WHO, that we are exaggerating on the shells and the provision. This is not true. There is a lot of qualifications to make sure that we do not go beyond what our legislation domestically or regionally allow us for the benefit of PPR. Obviously, if we were just to maintain what we have, status quo, no thank you. But what we have in front of us is not status quo, is not light. And my appeal to you all from the region is, let us finish this as soon as possible, hopefully by December, so that we can, there is an expectation from the world that we have this responsibility. Crossing our arms will not solve problems. We have outbreaks now that can be transformed into pandemic emergencies, and so there is no room for us to say, unless I get my point, I'm going to cross my arms. This is, in a way, criminal. The world needs this agreement as a first step, in addition to other steps that we should be discussing in due course in what is called an intergovernmental working group. This is phase 2. Phase 1 is the agreement. Let's have it. We can do it. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, embajador Tovar. Siempre es un placer escucharle, pero además con ese nivel de detalle y temas cruciales para nuestra sesión. En ese sentido, yo quisiera continuemos con la agenda y uno de los temas que vamos a discutir, que son las implicaciones de artículos seleccionados, y uno de ellos es el artículo 12. El artículo 12 del sistema de acceso a los patógenos y participación en los beneficios. Muchos de los Estados miembros y socios consideran que este es el corazón del acuerdo. De hecho, nuestro director mencionó todas las limitaciones que tenemos al acceso y participación en los beneficios, pero también hay otros elementos fundamentales en este aspecto y yo pido amablemente a Colin McKeith que haga la introducción al tema y luego el embajador Tovar complementará esos comentarios. Adelante, Colin.
Thank you so much, Ciro, for that. And let me begin by just adding my thanks and appreciation, as Ambassador Tovar did, to you, Dr. Barbosa, and to you, Ciro, and the whole PAHO team for making this happen. You know, as Ambassador Tovar and others alluded, I had the opportunity to serve you all for 2 years in the WG-IHR, in the IHR amendment process as the regional vice chair there, and it was just that was a very great privilege, and it was made so much easier and more impactful by the great work of PAHO and the Secretariat to bring us as a region together. And so this is another great opportunity to help get this agreement across the finish line, and I can only also agree with what Ambassador Tovar has said, that this truly is a potentially historic opportunity for us, and as DG Tedros also often says, a generational opportunity to learn from the lessons of COVID-19, from the inequities that were there, from the things we got right and the things we got wrong, and build on those for a better system that will benefit all of us. So for this afternoon, I won't belabor those points, but for this afternoon, I've been asked to speak about Article 12 and the pathogen access and benefits sharing system. And I would just echo what Dr. Ciro has said. Many delegations and many external stakeholders and many of our constituents throughout these negotiations have come to view the PAB system, as it's been called, as a really essential element of this agreement, both from the perspective of operationalizing equity and coming out with a concrete system that will work, but also, I would say, from the perspective of frankly addressing all of the aspects of pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. Coming up with a system that truly enables much more rapid and transparent and inclusive sample and data sharing, you know, that gets translated over time into much more rapid access for medical countermeasures, whatever those might be, starting with diagnostics, but also moving into vaccines and therapeutics. This is a critical goal that we all share, and I do agree with Ciro in that regard. regard that this is essential. But I also want to agree with what Ambassador Tovar was getting at in his overview, that you should not look, and I would encourage ministers and colleagues, excellencies, to look at this not in isolation as you're reading your briefs and going through the updates from your teams on the negotiations, but recognize that the PAB system will be functional also because of some of these other elements, whether that's Article 13 on the supply chain network that Ambassador Tovar alluded to, or some of the work on research and development in Article 9, or the regulatory system strengthening in Article 14. All of these things are taken together are what's going to strengthen our collective preparedness and prevention capabilities. And so for PABs, we have within the health system and within WHO, within the WHO context, though it's true we have not had a legal instrument negotiation of this variety in some time, we do have some other examples to draw from. And I guess I would try to be a little bit provocative by linking what we're trying to do in PABs with what's already happening in WHO through the PIP, through the Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework. And while that's very different in many ways, and influenza is very different from the types of pathogens, especially from a from an industry case and from those kind of issues, there are many parallels as well. And I think when we look at the challenges to coming to consensus around PABs, I would just reflect at least something that I've seen as a negotiator over the last several years within the region, is that there seems to be a lot of collective commitment around looking at PABs in the same way from a big picture perspective that we look at the PIP framework, which is to say there are transactional aspects in there, including legal contracts for companies to access the system, those kind of aspects. But there's also a system approach that's taken, so that there's not, as in the case in the environment sector, necessarily one-to-one relationship where one country donates a sample and they're getting assistance back immediately. It's more of a systemic strengthening that's being looked at. And so in PABs, I think if we can look at it in that way, it's something that could help us move toward agreement. I just want to take a few minutes to go over some of the major issues. Ambassador Tovar has alluded to some of them that we need to collectively come to agreement on as a part of this system. One is a % allocation during a pandemic emergency. There have been a lot of discussion on what the allocation we would be looking at would be, and there are different views on that within the region and between regions in particular. Another question, which I feel like there might be more agreement within the region on, is around inclusion of a FAIC. The latest Bureau text talks about inclusion of allocations for a FAIC, but doesn't set a hard and fast number like it does for a pandemic emergency. And given the diverse nature of FAICs, like we're already seeing, for example, in MPOX, that may make some sense, but that's something that member states need to collectively come together on and look at. Another big question in this is, as we look to build a system that is truly actionable and operational and sustainable over time, is how do we engage, what is the proper role for WHO, which of course that needs to be a very strong and central role for WHO in any kind of PAB system, but how do we engage other partners and other stakeholders in this system, and how do we bring them in, recognizing there are other partners? For example, in the case of vaccines, UNICEF very active in procurement, Gavi very active in vaccines. How do we make sure that these other partners have the roles to play as well? Another question is traceability, and how far we go with that, especially when we're talking about gene sequence data, and what is practical in a system where we're talking about so many sequences being shared on a daily and hourly basis. What is a practical system for traceability, and where are the diminishing returns there? Another element that we need to look at, and I think that there does seem to be positive movement on, is annual monetary contributions. So, similar from the PIP framework, there's been a proposal within the ultimate PAB system for there to be annual monetary contributions into the system. And that is something that I think there's a lot of support for in the region and across regions. But the question comes, what does that look like, and how do you set that at a reasonable amount so that you're actually enticing companies to participate in the system and not creating a barrier to entry that would actually perversely prevent companies from seeking to join the system. So that's one aspect. A second aspect about the annual monetary contributions that I think we in our region need to think about, and Ambassador Tovar has alluded to this as well, the producers of any given product, vaccines, diagnostics, therapeutics that exist right now aren't necessarily going to be the same set of producers that are involved in this area, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, that kind of thing. And so we need to design a system that's flexible and can evolve. We hope very much, and I can speak for my government as well in this case, that we want these local production efforts, the supply chain diversification efforts, to be successful. That actually not only is beneficial from an economic standpoint for our region, but from a public health standpoint, so that we don't face those same problems as we have in COVID with the supply chain breaking down, as Dr. Barbosa noted. So that's something that we have to think about. And then finally, again, just the legally binding nature of the system and what we do there. All of these things that I've gone through, they're being addressed in certain aspects in 12, but I think it's also important for delegations to keep in mind that as Ambassador Tovar noted, where the most delegations are, and I wouldn't say all, and so this is something that we have to discuss and I think come to agreement on together. Most delegations have come to the agreement that there will need to be an onward negotiation of some kind, an INGWIG, as was alluded to, potentially, to look at this work and potentially the work that we're going to talk about next when it comes to Article 4 on prevention and 5 on One Health. And so we also need to think about what is the right amount of detail for now for the agreement, so that we're all on the same page and we're moving in the same direction, and what of these details that I've just gone through can be left for that onward negotiation, so that we can give ourselves some space to have success with this historic round of negotiation and then move on into the next round of negotiation. So with that, Dr. Ciro, I think I'll stop for now, but thanks. Hopefully that was a helpful overview.
Thank you so much, Colin. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much once again. You see, we are going to resume negotiations formally on the 4th of November as INB 12. 4th of November, we have enough time from now until the 4th of November to hold 6 informals on various pending articles, including 12. 12 we're going to discuss on Monday afternoon, Monday the 24th of October. You're all invited to follow online. The idea of having some sessions in the afternoon, including 12, 13, and Chapter 1, is to allow countries that are not, some hours behind Geneva to follow, because this week, beginning on Wednesday at 9 o'clock, we start discussions on Chapter 3, on Thursday on Articles 9 and 11, and then Friday on Article 4. What I'm saying is we have, through these 6 sessions, enough time to informally try language. We're not able to negotiate because drafting is very serious. You can only do formally sitting as drafting group That is in November. But there's nothing that prevents us from, even from region common positions, to come and propose ways out of what it seems to be now deadlocks or difficult, or as is popularly called, sticky points. But Colin, you've mentioned so many issues that it seems that we have very little agreed on POBs. And I know this was not your intention because you were very thorough and complete in your assessment. But let me share with you the following. First, there is no questioning that we will have a POB system. This is out of the question, as agreed upon. There is a minor difference of opinion whether we, in the agreement, hereby establish or agree to establish. Because some countries say, look, unless I see the details, I'm not very comfortable in hereby establishing. You see, it's a very nuanced difference, but the POBs is something that has been agreed upon. There's another detail. You're talking about access to information, so you're going to grant information through or materials, but digital information, for example, and POBs materials, and then you expect, linked to these sharing of information and material, to receive some benefits. So we have indicated, much mimicking the PIP framework, the benefits arising from the sharing of access of information and material. But there is another set of, there are some delegations in saying that in addition to these benefits, you may have other benefits. But some countries say, look, if you go to a bakery with your flour, you expect to walk out with bread or something equivalent, right, made of flour that I gave to the baker to make. You don't want piano lessons. You don't want carrots. You don't want a birthday cake. You want bread. So it is only, you say, no, but we were in a position to train or to give, fine. If you give that as a bonus, finish first with the benefits arising from the sharing of information, and then we'll talk about other benefits. This is in the way of us agreeing what we're talking about. Access to information and material versus sharing of benefits. And we are actually, we know that we are creating a system that is a lot larger than the PIP framework and even the Nagoya Protocol. So the only experience, the ABS systems that are most common are these ones, right? PIP, specific for health, Nagoya Protocol, and the CBD Convention for materials and resources that countries are sovereign to share or not. But those are, let's say, noble resources. Pathogens, you want to get away with them. You want to inform the world, look, I have identified a pathogen. Let us stop this from spreading. So in nature, it's a little bit different. But as you mentioned, Colin, when you share material, you can trace easily. When you share information, it's more difficult. So we are aware of that. What I'm saying is the complexity of a well-structured POB system is immense. So right now, we are interested in setting the foundations, the elements of a POB system. When you build a house, you need to have pillars, you need to have number of rooms, you need to have allocation of space, but then the color of the bathroom tiles can come later, you see? So you mentioned the annual contribution. It is important to have annual contribution. That would enable, for example, countries that do not have labs equipped to make the genomic or genetic sequencing appropriately to benefit from that. To give just one example. So the detail of how much you will be asked to contribute will come later, but you need to set as one of the list of things that are elements, the annual contribution, and you mentioned also allocations. The negotiations went to a phase of agreeing to have allocations. The industry is in agreement with that. That's a major step forward. That was something that countries would not even allow discussing. Well, how much? I don't know. It's difficult. Even it may vary from pandemic emergency, but you need to have stock to respond. And rightly, the Bureau thinks that fake cannot be treated as pandemic emergency, because in a way, we are now already benefiting from the IHR. There will be temporary recommendations from the DG. So we are going to use that for fake. And then maybe, as appropriate, we will devise a set of stock of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics to avoid the fake to become a pandemic emergency, and then you are caught without any response means, without any VTD. So that is agreed that we're going to have allocations. We have agreed to discuss this instrument appropriately, so it's agreed language that we will not have all the details now. We now have to create the system, agree on these basic elements, and also agree something very important. Once you pay into this system, you're not expected to pay again into another system. So to avoid what we call the stacking or the redundant or duplication of obligations. All of these are elements that are known on the table, and I think we have enough time in November and through the informals now to sort that out and get funneled to something that is robust, that is ambitious, but is viable. We need the actors, manufacturers, industry, member states to be comfortable with this system, otherwise it will fail. And I think if we do not include the word viable, we're making a mistake. We're creating something that is very theoretically important, but it won't be possible, it won't be operational. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Colin. We will continue with the other articles, and we will have questions and answers after the three of them, okay? So it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Alejandra Pizarro Ibáñez from Chile to give us her perspective on Article 4, prevention and surveillance of pandemics. Please.
Gracias, Ciro. Director, Ciro, autoridades acá presentes, muy buenas tardes a todos. Quisiera sumarme también a los agradecimientos por organizar esta reunión que sin duda mantendrá a todos los estados de la región al tanto y permitirá avanzar más rápido. Al igual que los otros colegas que me precedieron, Chile espera que se pueda lograr lo antes posible un tratado de pandemia. Bueno, yo entonces les voy a comentar brevemente lo que ha ocurrido en las últimas semanas respecto del artículo 4. Primero, recordar el mandato y la labor del ONI, que es redactar y negociar un acuerdo, convenio u otro instrumento internacional de la OMS sobre prevención, preparación y respuesta frente a la pandemia, y esto es de conformidad con la decisión SSA 2.5 del 2021. Otro de los acuerdos que ha tomado el grupo tiene que ver con la complementariedad entre el acuerdo de pandemias y el reglamento sanitario internacional, y por otro lado también que todos estamos, ¿cierto? Los estados partes estamos cautelando de que evitar la duplicación con el reglamento sanitario internacional. Por otro lado, quisiera recordar el punto 16 del Tratado de Pandemias, que ya está consensuado por todas las partes, que señala que la prevención, la preparación, la respuesta y la recuperación adecuada de los sistemas de salud frente a las pandemias forman parte de un proceso continuo para combatir las emergencias sanitarias y lograr mayor equidad en materia de salud mediante una acción decidida sobre los determinantes sociales, ambientales, culturales, políticos y económicos de la salud. Y recalco acá que este punto 16 del acuerdo ya está consensuado por todas las partes, y eso quiere decir que está en verde, y ustedes cuando pueden revisar el documento ven que hay algunos párrafos en verde y amarillo. Este está en verde. Eso quiere decir que estamos todos los estados partes de acuerdo con esta premisa. Con respecto al panorama general del artículo 4 en el INB 11 recién pasado del 9 al 20 de septiembre, el artículo se discutió de manera general en una primera jornada del 11 de septiembre y ya posteriormente en una segunda jornada el 19 de septiembre los Estados miembros ya hicieron comentarios más específicos al texto. Algunos países solicitaron, Algunos países solicitaron incluir un instrumento específico para abordar todos los temas de prevención, incluyendo el enfoque One Health, hecho que aún se encuentra en discusión debido a la falta de acuerdo, especialmente la necesidad de establecer un instrumento bajo el alero de este artículo. El artículo evolucionaba bastante durante las negociaciones e intenta capturar los elementos más relevantes que no están contemplados en otros instrumentos. A continuación, describiré los principales elementos que contiene el artículo 4, considerando el texto en pantalla revisado en el INB 11. El primer párrafo, y lo menciono como elementos principales porque esto no está textual, sino que es el menú que, como señala siempre el embajador Tovar, que contiene el artículo 4. En el artículo 1, en el párrafo 1 se señala la obligación de tomar medidas individuales y mediante la colaboración para fortalecer capacidades en cuanto a la prevención y vigilancia de acuerdo al RCI. Y acá se señala como una obligación, pero que se va a implementar de manera progresiva. En el párrafo 2 se establece la necesidad de elaborar, fortalecer y aplicar planes de prevención y vigilancia de pandemias que sean coherentes con el RCI, y acá este párrafo cautela el principio que les nombré en la primera diapositiva, y que abarquen, entre otras cosas, la prevención de la aparición y reaparición de enfermedades infecciosas, la vigilancia coordinada multisectorial y la evaluación de riesgos, agua, saneamiento, higiene, prevención de resistencia antimicrobiana, programas de inmunizaciones, entre otras que ustedes pueden ver en el documento. Y acá dejé en negrita dos elementos que tienen que ver con la prevención de resistencia antimicrobiana y los programas de inmunizaciones, y esto más que nada quería destacar que no se encuentran explícitos en el Reglamento Sanitario Internacional, pero que sí se vigilan mediante el anexo 2 del reglamento y son parte de las capacidades básicas también del anexo 1. Y por otro lado, ustedes saben bien que existen planes y programas nacionales y también internacionales sobre la resistencia antimicrobiana e inmunizaciones. El párrafo 2 bis hace reconocimiento a la existencia de distintos factores que pueden incrementar el riesgo de pandemias, y los países tratarán de examinarlos para la elaboración y aplicación de políticas. El párrafo 3 menciona que la COP podrá adoptar, según necesidad, recomendaciones o directrices para apoyar la aplicación del artículo. Y existen tres propuestas para el párrafo 3 alt, que básicamente lo que plantean es la creación de un instrumento de prevención que contemple el enfoque One Health, con distintos lenguajes, obviamente, por eso son tres propuestas. Y finalmente quisiera plantear algunas reflexiones respecto de este artículo. Primero, que la prevención es uno de los elementos más importantes a considerar en un tratado o instrumento de pandemias, y que debemos buscar todas las formas para que todos sus aspectos estén bien cubiertos. Como pudieron ver, el artículo evolucionaba bastante durante las negociaciones en estos años e intenta capturar los elementos más importantes de prevención que no estén contemplados en el Reglamento Sanitario Internacional, procurando garantizar complementariedad y evitar la duplicidad con el mismo. Por otro lado, existe preocupación por la duplicación de los contenidos del artículo con el RCI, y esto podría implicar confusión en su aplicación. Asimismo, los Estados partes requerimos elementos técnicos para poder negociar este ítem de forma eficiente, y especialmente para evaluar la necesidad de establecer un instrumento de prevención en este artículo. Y en ese sentido, en la reciente reunión del INB 11, Chile solicitó a la Secretaría que pudiese elaborar un documento técnico que describa todos los sentidos y aspectos de la prevención que ya están cubiertos por el Reglamento Sanitario Internacional recién enmendado y adoptado por la Asamblea Mundial de la Salud. Por ejemplo, la prevención a la interfaz humano-animal, prevención primaria, prevención secundaria, terciaria, y si existirían brechas que están pendientes y que debiera cubrir el artículo 4 del Acuerdo de Pandemia. Las reuniones informativas sobre el INB continuarán esta semana, como acaba de señalar el embajador Tovar, y sobre el presente artículo se desarrollarán el 4 de octubre, a la cual obviamente están todos los estados partes invitados. Nosotros estamos confiados en que estas reuniones podrán aclarar los puntos más controvertidos y así lograr el consenso en la aprobación, ¿cierto?, del tratado de pandemias. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Then I would like to ask Zoe Khan to give us some remarks, please.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I'd echo others in thanking PAHO for bringing us together today and for all the other times you brought us together, because I do think there has been power in the AMRO region speaking with one voice and being able to focus on our overarching objectives that we all agree on. So thank you for that. And I will also say Canada also remains committed to the development of a meaningful pandemic agreement in as soon as we possibly can. So I perhaps have the easiest job today speaking about Article 5. It's probably the least contentious of the three articles we're discussing today. I'd say from the beginning, the INB envisaged a strong role for One Health within the pandemic agreement. If we look back to the draft outline in the agreement that was discussed in the second meeting of the INB, I think there were 12 references to One Health, including suggesting that the agreement should have a part that could address a comprehensive approach to One Health, promoting coherence among all relevant actors, instruments and initiatives. Over the course of the negotiations, we've seen many different proposals for how best to include One Health, ranging from it being a cross-cutting theme that should appear everywhere to having its own dedicated article. And then in fact, the prevention instrument that is currently proposed under Article 4 was originally proposed under Article 5, the One Health article. All to say, it's been no small effort to get to where we are today, which is a text that enjoys broad consensus from INB members, but that is pending, of course, decisions that need to be taken on Article 4. So the current Article 5 text acknowledges the interconnectedness of human, animal, and environmental health and emphasizes the need for coordinated action. So to be clear, the article is not aimed at implementing One Health as a broad concept, but rather on applying a One Health approach to PPPR. And the scope of the article is targeted while providing parties with the flexibility that they need to adapt their measures according to their national and subnational contexts, realizing that these all differ. The article promotes collaboration among various sectors, which we know is crucial both for addressing complex health challenges and for addressing the root causes of outbreaks and pandemics. And finally, it prioritizes proactive preventative measures over reactive ones, so including by highlighting the importance of equipping health professionals with across the sectors with the skills and knowledge they need to make evidence-based decisions regarding outbreaks. So going through more specifically, the article has three key measures. In 5.1, it asks parties to commit to promoting a One Health approach that is coherent, integrated, coordinated, and collaborative among all relevant organizations, sectors, and actors. With respect to what relevant organizations are, this is continues to be a subject of some debate, whether it's the quadripartite or beyond that. But the intention right now is to confirm who these are in the resolution that would accompany the draft text when it goes to the World Health Assembly. In 5.2, it asks parties to commit to take measures aimed at identifying and addressing the drivers of pandemics and the emergence and re-emergence of infectious disease at the human-animal environmental interface through the introduction and integration of interventions into relevant PPPR plans. And then the final measure, 5.3, asks parties to commit to take measures aimed at promoting health, animal, and environmental health with support as necessary and upon request from WHO and other relevant intergovernmental organizations. In 5.3, it goes on to give two examples of what it wants to see included here. The first is a commitment to develop, implement, and review national policies and strategies that reflect a One Health approach as it relates to PPPR, including promoting the engagement of communities. So the engagement of communities and what that looks like has also been a subject of much discussion within negotiations. And so the current text includes a reference to Article 17 of the Pandemic Agreement, which focuses on whole of government and whole of society approach. So effectively 17.3a, and I haven't been using this, but I can move to. This is 17.3a, where it commits parties to promote and facilitate the meaningful engagement of Indigenous peoples, communities, including local communities, and relevant stakeholders at all stages of the PPR cycle. So that reference is included in Article 5. The final element that it wants to see is it wants parties to commit to promoting or establishing joint training and continuing education of the workforce at the human, animal, and environment interface with a view to building relevant and complementary skills, capacities, and capabilities in accordance with the One Health approach. So overall, the elements outlined in Article 5 highlight the importance of One Health in addressing public health. And by promoting a One Health approach, it looks to enhance collaboration, tackle root causes, and build capacity, ensuring we are better prepared to respond to health challenges. So I would say one of the overarching objectives of the IND is to develop a pandemic agreement that has measures that are practical, feasible, and implementable. And with this in mind, I guess the questions I would have to you on Article 5 is, to what extent do these measures provide sufficient guidance on how best to operationalize One Health in pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response? And then what role could PAHO play in supporting member states in meeting the obligations that are set out in Article 5? Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It was a very good introduction to those key articles. So now we open the floor to comments, questions on the three previous presentations. Please feel free to provide also comments from your perspectives in each of your member states. We will discuss later with all the coherence and complementarity with the IHR, with the amended IHR, but also we will discuss on how we would move forward on the meaningful participation of the member states in the actual negotiations. But at this point, I would like to open the floor. Please just, as we did during the council, just press your microphone and then you will have the opportunity to provide some comments. And also, I've requested my colleague, Mike Ryan, also to provide some comments on that. So eventually he will also comment on some of the key aspects and key issues that also prompted all our member states to move towards a pandemic agreement. And as Ambassador Tovar and all the speakers mentioned, we cannot continue with the status quo. We must do something to change the course of the next pandemic. And I think we do have the opportunity to do that, but of course, this is a member state's decision on all the way. So I don't know if you have comments. Okay, I see that. Mexico, please, go ahead.
Creemos y estamos seguros que una visión global y una respuesta es fundamental, y estamos en este sentido con la visión absoluta de que solo a través de esta colaboración y un acuerdo se puede llegar a eso, y por lo tanto sostenemos la necesidad de llegar a este siguiente paso. Nada más en este sentido, quisiéramos preguntar, y hay algunos temas que deseamos alertar, y que preocupan al país. La primera es que tanto ha estado involucrada la Organización Mundial del Comercio para evitar que existan tratados que al final no estén alineados y que esto ponga al estar al mismo nivel, después la implementación en un riesgo. El segundo, varios de estos elementos tienen que ver con la parte de regulación sanitaria. Y creemos que es fundamental también el involucro, inclusive dentro de las propias agencias, de este elemento adicional para asegurar que todos estos elementos están alineados desde una visión de seguridad de las acciones y evidentemente un resultado más favorable para las poblaciones. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, México. Vamos a recibir también las preguntas de Panamá primero y luego El Salvador. Panamá, por favor.
Hola, ok. Buenas tardes. Agradecemos en primer lugar esta sesión informativa y la presencia del embajador Tovar, que efectivamente ha sido clave en todo el proceso de negociación de este acuerdo pandémico. Nosotros venimos, yo en mi persona, he venido participando en las dos últimos ONI y hasta ahora la experiencia realmente que hemos tenido es en la negociación del convenio marco y del protocolo para la eliminación del comercio ilícito de productos de tabaco. En la negociación de estos dos tratados fue muy importante plantearnos un instrumento de carácter marco cuyos detalles y especificaciones realmente se trabajaran de manera progresiva conforme a la definición que la COP de dichos instrumentos ha venido trabajando y pensamos que sería el mismo mecanismo que debería utilizarse con el acuerdo pandémico. Con respecto a la negociación del Tratado de Pandemia, me permito coincidir realmente con lo planteado por la mesa, particularmente por el embajador Tovar y el distinguido representante de Estados Unidos, toda vez que durante la negociación de la ONI 10 y la ONI 11, lo que percibí es que hay un interés muy marcado de los estados en querer negociar temas que incluso son operacionales y que deberían pasar a definirse posteriormente. Eso me hace pensar en la necesidad de que se defina con mayor claridad dentro del instrumento cuáles son las funciones del secretariado de la OMS, que sería efectivamente el secretariado del acuerdo, y cuáles serían las funciones de la conferencia de las partes del tratado. Al revisar el instrumento y los artículos, nos parece que no están suficientemente claras y que hay algunos elementos que deberían enriquecerse para que efectivamente hubiese mayores posibilidades de lograr un consenso. Por otra parte, el acuerdo pandémico consideramos que es sustantivo para la salud nacional e internacional y definitivamente que si lo vinculamos a la decisión que acabamos de aprobar, ¿verdad?, en Naciones Unidas sobre resistencia antimicrobiana, no podemos desvincular ambos temas y por lo tanto tenemos que seguir trabajando y lograr acuerdos. Por otro lado, sí me gustaría saber si el embajador Tovar visualiza que tengamos posibilidades de generar confluencia en los temas sustantivos a lo interno de la región. A mí me parece que sería importante que reflexionáramos a este respecto, porque también en la experiencia previa de negociación, la región de las Américas jugó un rol muy importante en el acercamiento de las posiciones entre algunas otras regiones, particularmente entre las posiciones de África y Europa, que en estos momentos también están muy dispersas, muy diferentes, muy separadas. Entonces, me gustaría saber qué piensa la mesa sobre esta posibilidad y cómo nosotros entonces podríamos tratar efectivamente de apoyar ese proceso de alcance de resultados efectivamente en los tiempos previstos. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias. Ahora El Salvador, por favor.
Gracias. Agradezco a la mesa por todo el informe, la verdad ha sido muy enriquecedor. Sabemos, creo que todos los Estados miembros, que las negociaciones han sido difíciles, han ido paso a paso, línea por línea, y ha sido muy difícil coincidir. Sin embargo, más que una pregunta, es un llamado a la atención de todos, y no solo acá, sino que también aprovechando que tenemos en pleno a personas de OMS que son parte importante de este acuerdo de pandemias, que no le demos más largas. Creo que posterior a la pandemia que reciente vivimos, nos acercamos más a enfermedades que están evolucionando, están comportándose de manera distinta, y esto puede complicarnos más la situación en cuanto al tema de que nos pudiéramos poner de acuerdo entre los países si llegase a suceder una nueva pandemia, un nuevo evento pandémico. Ya lo mencionó bien Panamá, segundo lo que mencionaba en el sentido de que es importante tener mayor claridad y quizás mayor facilidad para poder tener injerencia desde las Américas y descentralizar también el tema de la atención para el acuerdo de pandemias. Muchas gracias.
Muy bien, muchísimas gracias. Entonces, en este momento pediría al embajador Tovar, luego a Colin y luego quien pudiera comentar también adicionalmente. Por favor.
Muchas gracias, don Ciro. First, allow me to say how constructive Mexico has been all along the negotiations. We would not have Article 9 on research and development if it were not for Mexico and Norway. So I'm really saying this not to please you, just to recognize and acknowledge. This is just one portion of what we have benefited from, many of you. And then I do think, to answer Panama, that there is room for a regional composition or approximation or possible compromise, or what I call the viable solution, which is landing zone for us to feel comfortable. Because if we have Canada, US, Central America, and Mexico, and South America, and the Caribbean together, we will cover various stages of development, number one, but also we will tap on the incredible cooperation that we have been able to do even before WHO existed. So I think the world wants that from us. It is not easy because obviously we have interests that are not alike. But that's the whole purpose of this agreement, to combine these differences in not only interests but also capabilities, but having one common interest, which is to prevent, prepare, and respond to pandemic emergencies. I think we are able to do that, and I'm confident we can still do that. And I know that the distinguished representative of Panama has been following and enriching our discussions. To answer more specifically on the idea of a framework, we have already reached a level of understanding that I would say in 70% of the agreement, it's beyond framework. And it's good. We were able to go, for example, we have made provisions on very important issues like the preparation of the workforce and care. So we have expanded. We also included reference to women and how important it is to safeguard the rights of women in order for them not to suffer. Canada has mentioned also, not only in Article 17, but in preamble, indigenous peoples and local communities, and also traditional knowledge. So all of these elements would normally not appear in a framework agreement. We have already indicated in very specific terms. Now, there is a portion that is an invitation for a development later. That is a typical framework plus. So we are setting, for example, the foundations of PABs. We are indicating provisions on prevention, but we're leaving room for further work. We know now that we need that. Different, for example, from the Rio 92 conventions, when we needed the framework in order for the world to come together, and then slowly we developed. But at the end, we were not able to anticipate. Now we know that we need annexes or protocols. Let's go for it. That's why we need to stop the agreement as it is with the final decisions that we have to agree upon in order for us to immediately start working on these details. So I think that is feasible, and I like to say this is not a framework, but it's a framework plus agreement. So we have been able to transcend the level of framework, and that's very good indication, I think. Now, rereading the articles on Chapter 3, 21 on the COP, and also on the role of the Secretariat, I invite all of you to read that, because this is going to be our discussion next Wednesday at 9 o'clock, 3 in the morning here in Washington. But anyway, I think it's important for those that are in Geneva, the delegations that have people in Geneva, to follow that discussion and bring your opinion on how best to improve the articles that have already been agreed on the Conference of the Parties and the role of the Secretariat. You will see that in the role of the Secretariat, there is a very specific intention behind the second part of Article 24, which is we're not allowing the Secretariat to do anything that is not in the, that the member states themselves do not agree. That's the Conference of the Parties authority. And also that the legislation in these countries do not allow. Because this is, you understand, necessary to put sort of a limitation to the role of the Secretariat, while acknowledging that WHO will be our support Secretariat. Mexico has also indicated the role of WTO. This is something that is still not agreed upon, but we need to make sure, for example, for PABs, if you agree on the allocation of VTDs, of vaccines and therapeutics, what if a country impose either an export restriction or even an import restriction so that you cannot get the input? This is serious. We still need to, we have language that indicates that we expect in the appropriate instance, that is WTO, not to interfere with the free flow of medical countermeasures, VTDs specifically, in order for us not to create a situation that you have what it takes to save lives, but there is a restriction that does not allow you. This is a whole, it goes also together with the removal of barriers to the free flow when you discuss on global supply chain. And finally, thank you, El Salvador, for this call. We completely agreed, and I speak for myself, but I want to hear from my colleagues here in the dais. This is the call we need. We need for the entire region and the entire membership to listen to your very wise words. We cannot and we will not surrender to just indifference or inaction, inertia. This is, as I said, even criminal. This is not going to happen. But on a more positive note, we can do this, and this region has what it takes to show the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Collin. Please, I know that you have to leave at 5:30 sharp, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Cyril. Thanks for the opportunity to respond. And Ambassador Tovar has really covered everything. But I want to thank colleagues for the reactions, and again the opportunity just to speak with you and be with you this afternoon. Just a couple of quick reflections. Along the same lines. One, I completely agree with my dear colleague from Panama that the Americas can and should and in fact must lead the way in terms of the solutions here. And the AMR One Health issue is a perfect example of that, where us coming together can be that bridge between those extreme views that are coming from Europe and from Africa. And we can, and because of our shared experience and our diverse experience, in fact, and diverse views, if we can come up with a solution, I think it really does stand a good chance to become the solution for the world. So I think that we should absolutely pursue that together as we can. I also want to appreciate and your engagement and your experience from FCTC. As Ambassador Tovar said, we actually, we need to learn from those who are actually living the details of a health-related COP and negotiating protocols like on illicit trade. And so would be very happy. I was going to urge the same thing in terms of looking at Chapter 3 language to make sure that it actually meets the needs of what we're putting together in the rest of the text, in the substantive elements. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there for sure, and of course it's green, but as Ambassador Tovar said, can we improve it? Can we, as we're finalizing the package, so that we're on the right path? And then I just also want to thank the colleague from Mexico for the links about alignment with IHR and the legal alignment that we should have, I would say, with WTO. I know that's going to be a discussion, so we won't get into that, but I think it for our collective benefit and the strength of this instrument, the more we can be aligned and oriented correctly legally with these other relevant instruments, including outside of health, I think that will be to our benefit. Thanks.
Thank you so much. No sé si Alejandra, Zoe quisieran hacer comentarios. Por favor, Alejandra.
Gracias, Ciro. Bueno, la verdad es que, como dijo Colin, está todo cubierto por las personas que me precedieron, pero quisiera agregar y complementar que efectivamente la región principalmente y la mayoría de los países estamos de acuerdo en que el instrumento de pandemia debe contener el menú con los elementos principales para que más adelante se trabaje el detalle de cada uno de ellos. Complementando también con respecto a la pregunta de la colega de México, me parece, sobre si estaba alineado con la Organización Mundial de Comercio. Efectivamente, una de las cosas que la mesa ha cautelado es de que esté este tratado alineado con todos los instrumentos y reglamentos internacionales que ya existen para que efectivamente no haya nada que se contraponga a ello. Y nuevamente invitarlos a que se puedan sumar a las sesiones informativas, porque pensamos que estas sesiones informativas van a complementar lo que ya se ha trabajado antes y se puedan lograr acuerdos prontamente. Gracias.
Gracias. Zoe.
Thank you. I don't think I can add much to what's already been said, other than to emphasize, I do think there is a role for the Americas. We have such diversity in our region that if we are able to come up with something, and I think that we have good relationships between and among our countries, that there's a real opportunity there for us to lead the way, and that, a willingness to do that too.
Thank you so much, Zoe. We began some minutes later, but we will continue. I promise that you will still be able to go to the reception. And I will ask my colleague Roberta Andraghetti to provide her comments on the complementarity and coherence with the IHR amendments and the pandemic accord. Please, Roberta.
Thank you, Ciro, for and Jarbas and Rhonda for inviting me back home. And for taking the risk of letting me speak. I had I had a number of slides, but I will focus on two summary tables that cover first the consistencies and inconsistencies across the two instruments, and one slide addressing Article 4 in particular, given the headaches that is giving member states negotiating. regarding the consistency and the inconsistency between the two instruments, we had a paper that was commissioned to the Secretariat by Member States ahead of IMB 11, and in that paper we had identified 6 areas that should have been, that were overlapping or interfacing. And if we go one by one quickly, the first area is related to the definition in the amended IHR, and which correspond to the Article 1 use of terms in the draft pandemic agreement. And there are 4 definitions that requires and member state recognize requiring very careful considerations to make sure that invoking that pandemic continuum that member states agreed jointly in the WJIHR and the IMB, that pandemic continuum has no solution of continuity, and that the IHR is used as the trigger for the implementation of the provision of the pandemic agreement. And those terms are specifically pandemic emergency, public health emergency of international concern, public health risk, and relevant health products. Then just an invitation, even for our sake as Secretariat, even if we don't have a role in the pandemic agreement, but please consider carefully how to use those terms consistently in the 2 instruments. Then the second point that, as Ambassador Tovar mentioned, that is still sort of not fully aligned between the 2 instruments is the point related to the use of the expression work to remove barriers that was adopted in Article 13 of the IHR when referring to equitable access to health products, and which is still discussed in the context of the IMB in relation to supply chain and logistics, procurement and distribution, and the work to remove barriers to equitable access is being discussed in the context of the IMB, because the use of other terms is being put on the table for negotiation, and specifically these terms are unhindered access, unimpeded access, and this is just a matter of negotiation skills to be at work here. Then the 4th area is not controversial, is that there is consistency related across the 2 instruments in relation to the provision related to financing. At least there is full coherence and consistency across certain paragraphs of the provisions concerned, but on the other hand, point 5, we have now an IHR, the amended IHR, that through the introduction of a new article, Article 44 bis, establishes a coordinating financing mechanism, which is not a fund, is a coordinating body that has been established, will be established when the amended IHR will be kicking in. And that new Article 54 bis of the IHR establishing the coordinating financial mechanism is the result of an heritage, because during the negotiations, you member states, you have important adopted provisions for the draft pandemic agreement, and you crystallize them in the IHR. So now we are in the situation of adjusting Article 20 in the pandemic agreement, from which the IHR provisions were extracted, and now the challenge is how, whether or not, basically are we going to duplicate this financial mechanism, or are through in the pandemic agreement, is there going to be a reference to the IHR as you have flagged in the resolution WHA 7717 adopting the amendments? Then this again a call for careful consideration. And the last item that we flagged in terms of in that paper in terms of interfaces between the amended IHR and the pandemic agreement is related to the establishment of the State Party Committee for the implementation of the international health regulations through new Article 54 bis. And now in Article 21 of the pandemic agreement regarding the conference of the parties, the COP, there is a reference to a committee, to a technical committee. Then again, while you continue addressing, probably reviewing Article 21 in the pandemic agreement, is important to give consideration to how to articulate whether or not, and if yes, how to articulate this State Party Implementation Committee for the IHR and subcommittees that are established in that Article 44 bis and the subcommittee in Article 21 of the agreement. Then, as Alejandra and Zoe mentioned, there is one major area where that deserves major consideration to ensure the alignment, the consistency between the two instruments. And this area is related to prevention, surveillance, and core capacities. When we prepared, the Secretariat prepared the paper ahead of IMB 11, we haven't flagged this area explicitly in that paper. But Chile, during the last IMB meeting, made the specific request of addressing to the Secretariat to address clearly technical overlaps and gaps in relation to prevention, surveillance across the two instruments. And we have done that exercise and analyze. You will have the slides in case you need more. Okay. And when we did the exercise of comparing the technical areas addressed in paragraph 2 of Article 4 of the draft pandemic agreement and the amended IHR of the 10 technical areas that are currently enumerated in paragraph 2 of Article 4 of the draft pandemic agreement vis-à-vis the IHR, the situation is the following. For prevention of the emergence and emergence of infectious diseases, that is mentioned currently in the pandemic agreement as a focus area, all these capacities related to this area are covered entirely by Annex 1, because we don't have to forget the IHR was born with SARS 2003, the current IHR 2005 was born with SARS 2003, which is a sort of quintessential emerging pathogens. Then with respect to coordinated multi-sectoral surveillance and risk assessment, basically the entire Article 1 applies, and with specific sub-paragraphs at the different administrative level related to this capacity. Then we have the third point, technical area currently addressed in paragraph 2 of Article 4 is the early detection and control measures, and the entire Article 1 is about early detection, surveillance, and implementation of control measures. In addition, also Article 4 and Article 6 of the IHR. Then when in the pandemic agreement we have WASH, and in that respect we Annex 1, even if WASH, water, sanitation and hygiene, is not explicitly mentioned in the IHR, in Annex 1 there are a number of provisions covering capacities related to the technical area, and in addition there are a number of provisions related to water and sanitation related to points of entry and international travel. As Alejandra mentioned, routine immunization is not addressed in the IHR as such. When it comes to the remaining area, infection prevention and control, again, covered both directly and indirectly by Annex 1, Annex 1A and Annex 1B. And, and regarding the prevention of infectious diseases at the animal-human interface, virtually again the entire Annex 1 apply, because it's coming from SARS 2003, and animals are mentioned and referred to in the definitions, and in several definitions under Article 1 and in other articles. Vector-borne diseases, again, is covered, virtually covered by the entire Annex 1, because the regulations are coming from, have a long history, are coming from yellow fever, and then again, because of, as a legacy, basically the whole IHR, several Annex 1 plus several other provisions are addressing vector-borne diseases. Laboratory biological risk management is addressed in Annex 1, and we discussed a lot about the prevention of antimicrobial resistance, is not explicitly mentioned in Annex 1, and any other provision apart as an example of the application of Annex 2. Hence, it means that if new emerging antibiotic resistance is mentioned in Annex 2 of the IHR, it should be covered by the remaining provision. Then this is a bit the situation, and I think we, regarding the overlaps, and I think we'll discuss more during the informal on the 4th of October. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. So we will discuss now the how we can enhance the participation, the meaningful participation of member states in the Americas. And also you will have access to the presentation, but I wanted to discuss some of the, first you see the PAHO support to the IMB negotiation, all the briefings and meetings that we had all these years. But still there are a lot to do. The member states' participation in the IMB in the Americas particularly have been highlighted by all the participants, but also the entire region. And there is the decision that this is coming from the 77th World Health Assembly. And the last IMB meeting that finished on the 20th of September, so very close to that, we will see all the consensus that was get there. But we know that this is a collective responsibility on regional collaboration regarding health equity, but also strengthening health surveillance, early alert and response. But there are some issues, some challenges to the meaningful participation of our member states from the Americas in the pandemic negotiations. One of them is the time zone differences. Negotiations begin at 9 a.m. Geneva, and these information sessions will again begin at 9 a.m. 3 a.m. or earlier in most countries in the Americas. It is not feasible for our capitals to participate. Resource constraints. Many permanent missions from the Americas face limited personnel in their permanent missions, and they cover all other aspects, not only health. So this is a huge challenge, particularly for small countries. communication challenges. Because of the timing of the discussions, this maintaining effective communication between missions and capitals, of course, affects the actual participation of our counterparts in Geneva. So how can they negotiate something that has not been consulted with the capital, specifically when there are changes that are proposed during the meeting? The other one is the participation asymmetry. These factors hinder the ability of countries in the Americas to advocate effectively for their needs. There are many other types of approaches, but we saw, still with all those challenges, we saw the effort of the countries in the Americas coming together and discussing among themselves, and we saw there are several ways to overcome that. Information sessions, including public, civil society, industry, relevant stakeholders, and interactive dialogues with experts that we are organizing and also supporting the GRUA coordination and the IMB vice chair to do. The structured decision-making processes, this is something that is a procedural framework to allow the member states to propose text, editing, and review key articles systematically. But that needs an additional effort from each of the member states. And the other one is technical working groups, so we can understand and provide a forum for in-depth, informal discussions on critical topics that we must understand. And there are other important elements in pandemic accord negotiations that we need to also to put forward and discuss and agree. The in-person discussions, the face-to-face meetings that have been essential to approach complex issues. During the IHR amendments, all those face-to-face meetings helped us, all our countries, to come along, to understand where that proposal is coming from, what is the content of it, the intention of it, and then changing some words, well, put us in a better position. That's why our region proposed more than 16 joint statements, presenting the joint statement of the Americas. And I recall, because I would like to also recall what the vice chair of Egypt mentioned during the negotiations of the IHR and the IMB also. They said, if the Americas, the region that has more challenges than any other region, the most differences, if the Americas come together in a regional statement, we as a world have an option to come out good from these negotiations. And I think if somebody from other region is saying that, I think we are better off if we come together. So we will organize expert contributions, but also regional coordination through the GRUA coordination mechanism. So we have a long line along, but you see that the last components of that are related with the IMB 12, and then eventually the special session of the World Health Assembly, if by 11 November we see that there is some greening text. I hope that's something that we can go, but it is difficult. We have to recognize that it is difficult. Still, we have to look for that, and then all the other way to the World Health Assembly on the 2025. Just to emphasize that in our region, our director committed to continue the cooperation with all our member states, and we will continue with these sessions, virtual sessions for the Americas at a time that we can allow the missions in Geneva and also our capitals. But also our director is looking for a better way to have the capitals, also both the ministries of health, foreign affairs, meeting during negotiations, so we can allow them to also participate in the actual negotiations. So this is part of what the region is looking at the negotiations and the meaningful participation of our member states. So with that, I would like to ask Mike to provide some comments on your view, please, on this session, and then our assistant director to give her closing remarks.
Great. Thanks, Cyril. Gracias, obrigado, and your hard act to follow. I was going to use, as I'm sitting beside a proud Peruvian, I use a quote from a wonderful Peruvian novelist, Marcio Vargas Llosa. And I need two quotes because I think they're relevant to this situation. One of his quotes says, "Wisdom comes to us when it can no longer do us any good." And let's not the wisdom come to us too late. The second thing Mario said was, politics is the art of the possible, not the art of the ideal. And I think, Tovar, you reflected on that. International multilateralism is sometimes messy, it's sometimes difficult, it's almost impossible to bring the concerns of every member state and address the needs of every member state. The question is, how far can we go to protect the future? And I think in order to protect the future, we need to remember the past. It's not so long ago since we would have all been sitting here in masks, and none of us would have been sitting quite so close together. And we would have been seeing the images of people fighting over oxygen canisters. We would have seen our health workers wearing plastic bags for PPE. We would have seen mass graves in the Americas, a sight that hasn't been seen for generations. And all of those things. So, lest we forget, we need to remember where we've come from if we're to understand the future. And in that sense, I think we are somewhat down to the wire. I have huge gratitude to Tovar and the work that he has done in the Brazilian government, but all of you in the Americas. I have never seen personally, and I've been in or around WHO for 25 years, the level of diplomacy and engagement from countries of the Americas in this process has been outstanding. And therefore, even with the time differences, your negotiators in Geneva are doing a great job. I'm a very well qualified medic, but I'm a trainee diplomat, and my main mentor is Tovar. He's taken me under his wing in Geneva, and he's determined to turn me into a diplomat eventually. So I speak under his guidance. But Tovar's leadership has been really, really amazing, both in terms of PABs, but also in terms of financial coordination and others. And I think we've seen that leadership cut right across the Bureau. So, Tovar, thank you, obrigado. You've been outstanding. For me, as someone who served in frontline public health yesterday, I dispatched 7, 8 frontline responders to a Marburg outbreak in Rwanda. You know, we dispatch people off to emergencies all the time. National governments do it all the time. And we send our staff into danger sometimes in order to solve public health problems. We need to understand that our communities need a better level of service. Our health workers need more safety. Our health workers need to operate in safe environments. They need the tools to be able to save lives. And unfortunately, during COVID and in too many emergencies, they don't have those tools. Simply, they don't have them because we don't pay for them, we don't coordinate, we don't manage supply chains. And when you look at the IMB negotiation, yes, we are stuck on things like PABs a bit and stuck on other things. But if you look at the breadth of it, it's trying to address a huge range of things, from workforce to research in Mexico. I would again say thank you so much. Mexico has led a very quiet negotiation that's kind of got us somewhere. Sometimes the best negotiations are the ones that are quietest. But it's covering a wide range of things. And I don't believe that the pandemic agreement at this stage can solve all of our problems. But not having a pandemic agreement will not allow us to solve any of our problems, and that's the issue. The issue is the counterfactual. The issue is you imagine the world with the pandemic agreement. That's what we're trying to do. Imagine one without it. Imagine a world destined to repeat the same errors of the last pandemic. That's what we need to imagine, because that may force us all to get into a better mood. Now, this is an agreement between WHO's member states. This is not an agreement of the Secretariat. You are the ones who negotiated the IHR, the Framework on Tobacco Control. And you will be the ones to negotiate this. We have to get away from all the misinformation and disinformation that in some way This is not and you need to shout this loudly. At the end of the day, the Secretariat will implement to the letter the will of the Member States. But it must be made clear to those out there spreading disgraceful mis and disinformation that it is your will that shall be done, not the will of the Secretariat. And that this is a negotiation between independent and sovereign Member States, and you shall decide what you wish the Secretariat to do. You will decide what level of agreement you shall reach between yourselves, and that will be done entirely within national law. And in no way will national laws or national sovereignty be impinged by this, because that's what's out there right now. That's what's out there in the ether. And that's hurting this agreement, because it's spooking governments, it's spooking leaders, and they feel they've been drawn into something that's very difficult on a domestic level. So if nothing else, if we don't get an agreement because we have a fundamental difference, fine. If we have to wait a bit longer, fine. But let us not end up not having an agreement because of misinformation and because of disinformation. That will be the greatest tragedy. And at the moment, I believe that's one of the greatest threats to this whole process. So I will ask you, on behalf of medics, on behalf of public health practitioners, on behalf of frontline workers everywhere, it is now time for our political leaders to show the way, for our multilateral negotiators to show the way, for our ambassadors to show the way. If that way is shown forward in the way that Tovar has shown that leadership on behalf of Brazil and the Americas in the negotiations, then we will succeed. So I thank you all. It's fantastic to be back in PAHO. We brought Roberta home, as you see. So, and over to the Assistant Regional Director.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to all our distinguished panelists for giving us an update on where we are with the Pandemic Accord, particularly Articles 12, 4, and 5. I believe you would have heard from Dr. Barbosa in his opening remarks, his hope for the accord, and I want to reiterate the challenges that Cyril would have mentioned, and I want to urge you to overcome those challenges, and particularly what Mike just mentioned, the misinformation. I think somebody mentioned that we can do it. We have a history in our region of cooperation and coming together, and I think the representative in Egypt has said that the world is looking at us. They're looking at us to move forward and get consensus on this accord. As member states driven, as would have been reiterated by the panel, but the Pan American Health Organization, the Secretariat, we are willing to continue to work with member states as we move forward. And I urge you, despite the challenges that Cyril would have mentioned in terms of the time zones, the fact that we have reduced personnel in some of our missions, that we continue to fight the way forward in making sure that we have a voice and that we come to agreement for this pandemic accord. In closing, I want to thank Panama, Mexico, and El Salvador for their comments and bringing to the floor some of the issues that they did raise. So thanks once again to the panel, thanks to the member states, those of you who participated in this very informative session, and I realize that I'm the only thing between you and a very nice reception hosted by the director. So thank you, and good night.
soutien technique de l'OPS-OMS auprès du ministère de la Santé publique et de la population a permis de réaliser près de 20 000 consultations et de fournir plus de 3 tonnes de médicaments et d'équipements médicaux pour la prise en charge des personnes déplacées internes. Les actions de surveillance épidémiologique, de vaccination, d'hygiène et d'assainissement ont permis d'identifier rapidement les cas de choléra et d'autres maladies à potentiel épidémique et de contenir la propagation de ces maladies au sein de ces populations. L'OPS-OMS entend intensifier son support technique et opérationnel dans les prochains mois car les défis à relever restent énormes pour répondre aux besoins des Haïtiens et des Haïtiennes qui continuent de fuir les violences des groupes armés.